Hello everyone, with Christmas approaching, in this video we'll be discussing the history of Santa Claus. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this. While the origins of the Santa Claus figure may appear on the surface as a cheerful, red-clad, gift-distributing character, it is actually a complex fusion of mythological, religious, and cultural layers spanning thousands of years. While this figure is recognized as a homogeneous figure in modern popular culture today, throughout history, it has emerged in quite distinct forms in different geographies, different periods, and different societies, merging over time to form its current form. To understand the origins of Santa Claus, it is necessary to consider him not solely as a Christian figure but within a much broader framework. This framework encompasses ancient pagan deities, medieval church saints, and the advertising strategies of modern capitalist culture. To properly examine Santa Claus's historical background, it is necessary to first return to the ancient era of Europe, specifically examining the winter solstice celebrations. The winter solstice has been central to rituals celebrated around the world for thousands of years. Many of these rituals feature the return of light, the resurgence of the sun, and the symbolic rebirth of fertility and life. These celebrations feature gifts, fires, sacrifices, masked figures, winter demons, and the protective figures who defeat them. Therefore, the counterparts of Santa Claus in ancient cultures include Odin, Saturn, the winter spirits, and various protective deities. Odin, particularly in Northern European mythology, is one of the most important characters considered the ancestor of Santa Claus. It was believed that Odin rode through the sky on his eight-legged horse, Sleipnir, during Yule. Children would put straw in Odin's shoes to aid him on his journeys, and Odin would leave them small gifts in return. This tradition can be considered a very early prototype of the modern Christmas stocking tradition. The influence of Odin on Santa Claus was not limited to gifts. Odin was also the god of wisdom, guidance, mystery, and spiritual journeys. His long white beard, elderly appearance, and long cloak are thought to have inspired the physical characteristics of the modern Santa Claus. Myths depicting Odin's secret wanderer, that is, wandering among people unseen and performing good deeds, bear a resemblance to today's Santa Claus, who secretly wanders around at night, leaving gifts. Therefore, the roots of the Santa Claus figure bear traces not only of a benevolent saint but also of a powerful pagan deity. The second major foundation of Santa Claus is associated with Saint Nicholas, a figure of great significance in the Christian world. Saint Nicholas was a bishop who lived in the 4th century and served in Myra, present-day Demre, Turkey. During his lifetime, he was known for his philanthropy, generosity, and compassion, especially towards children. Legend has it that he secretly left bags of gold through a window to provide dowries for the daughters of a poor family. In another story, he saved sailors from a storm and performed numerous miracles. These qualities gradually elevated Saint Nicholas to the status of a patron saint, and he gained a significant cult following, especially in Europe. During the Middle Ages, stories of Saint Nicholas were popularized by the Church, and over the centuries, thousands of legends have formed around him as a figure who helped children, women, sailors, and the poor. Saint Nicholas Day, celebrated annually on December 6, is synonymous with giving gifts to children in many European countries. This tradition is today considered one of the most direct historical roots of Santa Claus's gift-giving tradition. The Sinterklaas tradition, particularly in the Netherlands, played a major role in the formation of the modern Santa Claus. Sinterklaas is depicted as a tall, red-cloaked, white-bearded man and is said to arrive by ship at the beginning of December. This figure was later carried to America by Dutch immigrants, where it formed the basis of the modern Santa Claus. At this juncture where pagan and Christian roots converged, the folk traditions of European cultures also influenced the formation of Santa Claus's character. The figure of winter visitors is present in many parts of Europe during the Middle Ages and early modern periods. These winter visitors appear sometimes as good, sometimes as malevolent spirits, sometimes as elderly men who distribute gifts, and sometimes as creatures who punish mischief. For example, in Germany and Austria, Krampus, considered the dark counterpart of Santa Claus, was a figure used to frighten children. Many villages had customs such as winter spirits going door to door in November and December, men wearing masks, and village elders distributing gifts. Over time, these traditions fostered both the good-hearted and disciplinarian aspects of Santa Claus. Santa Claus's transition to the modern world accelerated, particularly in the 19th century. The Dutch who settled in the United States brought with them the tradition of Sinterklaas. In the British colonies, a figure called Father Christmas became a symbol of this spirit. These two characters began to merge over time, and American writers reinterpreted these stories to create a new Christmas figure. The poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, also known as The Night Before Christmas, published in 1823, is one of the most important works that shaped the physical and behavioral characteristics of today's Santa Claus. In the poem, Santa Claus has a reindeer-drawn sleigh, enters through a chimney at night, wears red, and is depicted as a cheerful character. The poem's influence was so profound that the modern image of Santa Claus is largely based on the profile depicted here. And in the early 20th century, newspapers, cartoonists, and advertisers rapidly popularized the figure. Thomas Nast's Santa Claus illustrations of the 1860s, in particular, standardized the figure's various details. In Nast's drawings, Santa Claus lived at the North Pole, owned toy workshops, and kept a list of children's names from around the world. Thus, Santa Claus was no longer merely a folklore character but an icon recognized throughout the modern world. The advertising campaigns of the Coca-Cola Company in the 1930s played a significant role in further popularizing this character. While it's true that the red and white colors weren't originally coined by Coca-Cola, these campaigns helped solidify the figure's global identity. The transformation of Santa Claus into such a widespread figure stems not only from the transformation of Christmas celebrations from a religious ritual into a cultural tradition, but also from the consumer habits of modern capitalist societies. Gifts, shopping, winter festivals, and brand campaigns have transformed Santa Claus into more than just a character. He's also the symbol of a massive industry. Despite these modern overtones, Santa Claus still bears traces of the spirit of Odin, the winter visitors of the Middle Ages, and the generosity of St. Nicholas. The process of shaping the figures that could be considered Santa Claus's ancestors during the medieval was quite fragmented, yet rich, due to Europe's cultural diversity. The emergence of very similar rituals across different geographies demonstrates the deep roots of this figure. With Christianity becoming the dominant culture across Europe in the medieval, ancient pagan traditions among the people did not disappear completely. Instead, the Church transformed these ancient beliefs and practices, blending them with Christian symbols. The blending that forms the basis of Santa Claus is a result of the cultural syncretism that took place over these centuries. In the medieval, St. Nicholas Day celebrations on December 6 began in many parts of Europe with gift-giving and fertility rituals for children. However, the origins of the celebrations observed during the Christmas season, that is, the last days of December, were more likely derived from pagan Yule festivals. While the Church attempted to separate these two traditions, folk culture gradually integrated them. Thus, December became a hybrid period in which both street Nicholas and Christian Christmas celebrations, along with much older pagan rituals, took place simultaneously. The winter visitor figures that roamed Central Europe during this period were of great importance. One of these was Krampus, later known as the anti-Santa Claus figure. Krampus appeared before children as a horned, furry, and chained creature, frightening the naughty and rewarding the good. This tradition contributed to the evolution of Santa Claus not only as a benevolent figure but also as a moral upholder. Today's concept of Santa Claus leaving gifts for good children and coal for the naughty is a softened version of the cultural influence of Krampus and similar characters. In the northern regions of the medieval, figures such as Yule Claus, Winter Man, and Soul Hunter existed. Many of these were reflections of Odin or other ancient gods that remained with the people even centuries later. In northern Scandinavia, spiritual figures who entered homes during Yule were believed to protect people, bring fertility, and provide assistance against the harshness of winter. These figures were sometimes depicted as old men. He sometimes appeared as a ghost, sometimes as a god, and sometimes as a benevolent spirit. This appearance helps us understand the modern Santa Claus, an elderly yet powerful figure, possessing both worldly and supernatural qualities. In Western Europe, the figure of Father Christmas emerged. This figure represented winter festivals and themes of abundance and prosperity rather than Christmas itself. During that period, Father Christmas was more of an adult character, a symbol of drinking, entertainment, feasting, and togetherness. He was not a character who distributed gifts to children, rather, he was a figure who personified the winter season. This figure is one of the primary sources of the jolly and playful old man aspect of the modern Santa Claus. During this period, contact between the figure of Saint Nicholas and regional folk figures gradually increased. The popularity of Sinterklaas was particularly high in the Netherlands. Sinterklaas dressed as a bishop, accompanied by attendants, rode on his horse, and rewarded children according to their behavior. While this tradition was banned in some regions under the influence of the Protestant Reformation in the 16th and 17th centuries, its popularity among the populace prevented its complete extinction. The weakening of saintly cults during the Reformation diminished the religious identity of Sinterklaas, transforming him into a more secular gift-giver. This transformation is an early example of the secularization of modern Santa Claus. During the medieval, gift-giving rituals for children were primarily focused on St. Nicholas Day, but over time, these rituals shifted to the Christmas season. This was due both to the Church's decision to make December 25th a more central celebration and to the winter festivals being the busiest time for the people. The Church attempted to organize ancient pagan celebrations within the Christian framework, making them more acceptable to the public. Thus, the figure of Santa Claus gradually became central to Christmas celebrations. Another purpose of giving gifts to children in the medieval was to maintain social morality. Children were rewarded for good behavior, while bad behavior was punished. This practice served as a mechanism of social control. The idea of Santa Claus, watching over good children, is actually a variation of the medieval understanding of social order, carried over to the modern world. During this period, various Santa Claus-like figures emerged in different regions, and over time, they influenced each other. Figures such as Knecht Ruprecht in Germany, Père Noël in France, Father Christmas in England, and the Tomte/Nis in Scandinavia represent different folk beliefs. However, what is striking is that most of these figures share common elements: an old man, the winter season, and gifts. The theme of offerings, moral messages, and home visits is seen almost throughout Europe. This commonality is strong evidence of Europe's history of cultural transfer. The beginning of the merger of these figures is one of the most critical stages in the emergence of the modern Santa Claus. Towards the end of the Middle Ages, with the rise of written culture and the advent of the printing press, narratives of these figures began to be more widely recorded and disseminated. The miracles of Saint Nicholas in church sources, the winter man figures in folk tales, Father Christmas and similar characters in the works of poets, combined to form a comprehensive folkloric pool. From this pool, the foundations of the modern Santa Claus were laid. Another element that makes the Middle Ages significant in the history of Santa Claus is the lack of a clear fixed definition of what the figure was. The characters seen as predecessors of Santa Claus during this period sometimes possessed sacred, sometimes secular, sometimes frightening, sometimes joyful, sometimes human, and sometimes supernatural qualities. This diversity explains why the modern figure is such a multifaceted character. Because the modern Santa Claus is a combination of these diverse characteristics, he is both a religious symbol of goodness, a secular icon of joy, and a cultural reflection of the winter spirit. With increased trade between European countries at the end of the Middle Ages, the onset of migration, and increased cultural interactions, these figures began to spread more rapidly. Furthermore, the Church's increased organization of winter festivals, standardization of rituals, and the strengthening of the Christmas season within the liturgical calendar transformed public perception of these figures, giving them a more organized structure. Thus, the figure of Santa Claus began to become etched in Europe's collective memory. One of the most striking aspects of the transformations the figure of Santa Claus underwent during the medieval was the gradual incorporation of religious motifs into popular culture, occasionally overlapping with pagan traditions. This period saw rapid changes in the belief systems of European societies, increased urbanization, expanded trade routes, and systematically increased the cultural influence of the Church on the people. The charitable works once performed by Saint Nicholas in a small Anatolian town were adapted to different narrative channels within the complex social order of medieval Europe, taking on new forms. While the Church promoted saintly figures who helped the poor, protected children, and represented moral virtue, the people integrated these figures into local traditions in accordance with their own cultural backgrounds. Thus, cultural reflections of what we might call the earliest forms of Santa Claus began to emerge. One of the most significant factors in the spread of the saints' cult during this period was the church calendar and the religious festivals held throughout the year. St. Nicholas Day, celebrated on December 6, was commemorated in medieval Germany, the Netherlands, and much of Northern Europe with small gifts given to children, home visits, and religious ceremonies. This tradition was a critical starting point in the formation of the Santa Claus figure. While Christmas gifts are now tied to December 25, in the medieval, the giving of gifts to children occurred on December 6. This gift-giving ritual formed the basis of Santa Claus's most characteristic element today, the act of giving gifts. In medieval society, St. Nicholas's gift-giving was not merely a gesture of love for children. The Church used this tradition to teach children goodness, obedience, loyalty, and religious virtues. The idea of rewarding children who behaved well throughout the year and admonishing those who behaved badly formed the basis of these practices. This point can be considered the historical origin of the good boy and bad boy distinction that Santa Claus would carry as he evolved in the centuries that followed. In addition to St. Nicholas, there were also characters that accompanied him in some regions. One of these was Krampus, particularly seen in Germany and Austria. Krampus appears as a punishing figure with a demonic appearance. While this dualistic structure, used to teach children goodness, has not completely disappeared from modern Christmas culture, it has largely receded as the gentler and more affectionate aspect of the Santa Claus figure has become more prevalent. Towards the end of the Middle Ages, the cult of Saint Nicholas was quite widespread throughout Europe. During this period, many cathedrals and churches were built in his name. His figure was depicted iconographically, his life was legendary, and his miracles were detailed in various sources. The smuggling of St. Nicholas's bones from Myra to Bari, Italy, instantly increased the saint's international fame. The Basilica of St. Nicholas in Bari became one of Europe's most important pilgrimage centers during the Middle Ages, contributing to the widespread dissemination of his image throughout the Christian world. This cultural expansion paved the way for the integration of the generosity, mercy, and protection concepts underlying Santa Claus into European culture. During the later Middle Ages, Christmas celebrations began to take a distinct shape in European society. While Christmas had established itself in Christianity as the holy day representing the birth of Jesus, its origins were actually rooted in much older pagan winter festivals. The Roman Saturnalia, the Germanic Yule celebrations, and the Celtic winter solstice rituals formed the foundation of this cultural transformation. Rather than completely banning pagan traditions, the Church chose to integrate them with Christian elements, ensuring a smoother transition for society. Thus, pagan festival structures, which celebrated both the longest night of the year and the arrival of new light, acquired a new religious meaning and became the characteristic rituals of Christmas. This cultural blend also played a decisive role in the development of the Santa Claus figure. In Northern Europe, the Christmas tradition blended with mythological characters who roamed the forests in the dead of winter, protecting or punishing children and animals. A blend emerged between the spiritual identity of Saint Nicholas and the folkloric figures of the pagan world. For example, Odin in Norse mythology was believed to roam the skies during the winter months riding his eight-legged horse, Sleipnir. Odin was a powerful god associated with wisdom, abundance, and even punishment. Some cultural historians argue that the origin of Santa Claus's journey through the skies with his flying reindeer can be traced back to this legend. The depiction of Santa Claus as a white-bearded old man is another element that parallels Odin. Thus, the figure we see today as Santa Claus is actually a combination of the historical reality of Saint Nicholas and the pagan mythologies. It represents a composite structure composed of embolic remnants. Towards the end of the Middle Ages, with the increase of trade and urbanization in Europe, winter festivals began to evolve into larger social events. Marketplaces expanded, the venues where winter festivals were held diversified, and the culture of gift-giving became economically visible. Giving gifts to children was considered a form of social solidarity. Wealthy families helped the poor, city leaders organized community events, and churches distributed small gifts to poor children. At this point, the economic aspects of the Christmas figure began to emerge. Santa Claus became not only a religious figure but also a symbol of the socio-economic structure of society. Another important element that emerged during this period was the visits of young men or priests dressed as Saint Nicholas to homes. These visiting ceremonies are among the oldest forms of the modern tradition of Santa Claus going door-to-door distributing gifts. The costumed individual sometimes delivered religious messages, sometimes tested children by asking them if they had behaved well throughout the year, and sometimes distributed small rewards. This practice continued throughout the Middle Ages as a strong tradition throughout Northern and Central Europe and persisted in many regions even centuries later. All these characteristics acquired by the figure of Santa Claus during the Middle Ages constitute the cornerstones of his transmission to modern world culture. The moral teachings of Saint Nicholas, the themes of celestial journey and the spirit of winter in pagan mythology, the economic dimension of social cooperation, the discipline and reward system for children, religious costume practices, and the symbolism of celebrations associated with the turn of winter are the elements that form the DNA of the modern Santa Claus. The Renaissance period marked a critical turning point in the evolution of the figure of Santa Claus. The image of Saint Nicholas, steeped in the religious significance of the Middle Ages and folklore, found its place in a completely new cultural context during this period. The Renaissance, a period in which European thought shifted, anthropocentric thinking strengthened, and old dogmas were questioned, witnessed a series of transformations that directly impacted Christmas traditions. The shifts in art, literature, theology, and socio-economic structures during this period laid the groundwork for the shape the figure of Santa Claus would take in the centuries to come. First and foremost, the Renaissance brought about a re-evaluation of the cults of saints. The authority of the Church remained strong, but individual piety and personal interpretations of faith began to gain importance. This led to the public's acceptance of Saint Nicholas as a more personal, more human figure. His life story, surrounded by miracles throughout the Middle Ages, was reinterpreted as a moral exemplar during this period. Nicholas's gift-giving was treated less as a miracle and more as a symbol of virtuous behavior. This change led to a slight decline in the figure's mystical dimension, while its social and cultural functions came to the fore. During this period, Europe's economic development also accelerated. Trade networks expanded, urban economies strengthened, and the trading states of Northern Europe, in particular, began to utilize the Christmas season as a time of economic activity. Marketplaces became more vibrant as Christmas approached. Crafts such as toy-making, carpentry, and candy-making were in high seasonal demand. Gifts for children were no longer merely symbolic gifts but also a prominent part of the city's economy. This new economic dynamic significantly contributed to the identity of the Santa Claus figure as a gift-giver. As in the collective memory, gifts began to become not only a religious symbol but also an economic habit. The Reformation, which followed the Renaissance and radically altered the cultural landscape of Europe, had a profound impact on Christmas traditions. The Protestant Reformation, initiated by Martin Luther, led to a strong reaction against the Catholic cult of saints. Practices such as the worship of saints, excessive veneration of icons, and saints' days were heavily criticized by Protestant theologians. This situation led to the direct targeting of Saint Nicholas. Nicholas, a beloved saint in the Catholic world, was considered a suspicious figure in Protestant regions. However, rather than disappearing completely, he underwent a cultural transformation and took on a different form. Martin Luther introduced a new concept for children, which he called Christkind, as an alternative to the Catholic saint cult. Christkind, or Little Jesus or Baby Jesus, was introduced as a new figure bringing gifts to children in Protestant societies. This transformation was particularly influential in Germany and surrounding countries. Initially, this was intended to completely eliminate Saint Nicholas. However, the strong tradition of saints in popular culture prevented this from happening. Consequently, the two figures, Saint Nicholas and Christkind, continued to coexist in the same regions for centuries. This laid the groundwork for the secular and religious hybrid character that the figure of Santa Claus would adopt as it was reinterpreted in later centuries. Another important point is the understanding of moral discipline that emerged in Europe after the Reformation. In Protestant societies, the methods used to regulate children's behavior merged with the figure of Saint Nicholas, who rewarded or admonished children, becoming a new educational tool. From this period onward, the idea of gifts for good children and punishments for bad children became more systematic. Saint Nicholas and his accompanying punishment figures, such as Krampus, Knecht Ruprecht, and Zwart Piet, were reinterpreted as tools of social discipline. This culture is a fundamental legacy that directly shapes the modern Santa Claus's relationship with children. During the same period, Northern Europe experienced a significant revival of local folklore. Especially in regions like Scandinavia, the Netherlands, and Germany, pagan-based figures such as winter spirits, house spirits, and forest guardians continued to be integrated into Christmas traditions. In the Netherlands, the form of Saint Nicholas, known as Sinterklaas, became stronger in folk cult as a character who rode across rooftops on horseback, entered houses through chimneys, and left gifts for children. These characteristics of Sinterklaas directly formed some of the most important elements of the modern Santa Claus. During this period, Sinterklaas's helpers also became prominent. These helpers are folkloric figures who accompany him in the distribution of gifts and are the first prototypes of what would evolve into the elven culture of Santa Claus centuries later. When all these cultural, theological, and economic transformations of the Renaissance and Reformation come together, it becomes clear that the figure of Santa Claus is no longer tied to a single origin. Rather, it has acquired a multi-layered, multi-sourced, and multicultural structure. The religious virtues of Saint Nicholas are symbolized by the symbols of pagan legends. The world of saints, the solidarity-based habits of economic transformation, the anti-saint attitude of the Protestant Reformation, and the powerful imagination of folklore all intertwined to pave the way for the modern Santa Claus. This period marked the time when Santa Claus came to be accepted not merely as a saint but as a part of social identity, the central figure of winter holidays, and a cultural symbol shaping children's imaginations. The 18th century is considered the beginning of the period in which the figure of Santa Claus took on its modern form. Before this century, Santa's form, name, behavior, and symbolic role varied from region to region, exhibiting significant differences among local cultures. However, the social transformations brought about by the Industrial Revolution, the expansion of communication, the acceleration of urbanization, the spread of printing technology, and the emergence of mass culture became the most powerful factors transforming Santa from a local tradition to a global figure. The Industrial Revolution's transformation of social structure played a decisive role in Santa's evolution. From the late 18th century onward, the rapid increase in factory labor in Europe and America transformed the nature of family life. While urban workers toiled for long hours under grueling conditions, children and family unity became increasingly valued. Amidst this social pressure, the Christmas season began to be seen as a time for people to escape, even if only briefly, the hardships of daily life and to re-strengthen family ties. Therefore, Santa Claus's gift-giving, love-inspiring, and unity-inspiring nature became a highly functional symbol for this new social order. The Industrial Revolution also radically transformed toy production. Toys, once limited to manual labor, could now be mass-produced in factories at much lower costs and in much larger quantities. This led to the transformation of the tradition of giving gifts to children into an economic sector. Toy manufacturers, advertisers, and the emerging consumer culture began to seize the Christmas season as a commercial opportunity. The figure of Santa Claus became one of the most central elements of this commercial activity. Thus, Santa Claus ceased to be a mere religious and cultural figure and gradually evolved into one of the most recognizable symbols of modern consumer society. In the early 19th century, Christmas traditions, particularly in the United States, began to change rapidly. The Dutch immigrant tradition of Sinterklaas, the English figure of Father Christmas, and the German cult of Christkind began to merge in America, creating a new form. New York City became the center of this fusion. This city, which the Dutch called New Amsterdam and carried the Sinterklaas tradition, became the most important cultural laboratory that shaped the American version of Santa Claus. One of the figures who played a decisive role in the modernization of Santa Claus was American author Washington Irving. In his 1809 work, Irving depicted a figure inspired by Sinterklaas, circling over New York City in a flying sleigh and delivering gifts from chimneys. This was a significant step in the introduction of Santa Claus's flying and chimney-sliding attributes to a wider audience in a literary work. Irving's depiction laid the foundation for the modern image of Santa Claus that would later develop. However, the most critical contributor to the transformation of the modern Santa Claus was the author of the poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, also known as The Night Before Christmas, written in 1823 and considered one of the most important texts in Christmas culture to this day. This poem, likely written by Clement Clarke Moore, solidified the elements that define Santa's symbolic image. In the poem, Santa Claus is a small, cheerful, plump figure. He travels through the sky in a sleigh pulled by 8 reindeer, he slides down the chimney to leave gifts, and he portrays a cheerful character profile with a ho, ho, ho style. Santa's physical characteristics are also clarified in this poem. He is presented as a smiling old man with a white beard. This poem is one of the most powerful texts that form the cultural DNA of the modern Santa Claus. During the same century, the figure of Santa Claus was no longer confined to literary works. He reached a wide audience through newspapers, magazines, and, especially, drawings. This is where Thomas Nast came into play. Nast, one of America's most famous cartoonists, virtually sealed the visual identity of the modern Santa Claus when he depicted Santa Claus in the 1860s. In Nast's drawings, Santa closely resembles his current appearance, particularly in terms of colors, clothing details, belt, boots, and facial expression. In these drawings, Santa Claus lives in the North Pole, makes toys, and travels the world. It's crucial that Nast also created a home ecosystem for Santa Claus. Details like Santa's workshop, the mail system where he receives letters, and his compilation of lists all became popular during this period. These elements transformed the figure of Santa from a mythical being who appeared only one night into a cultural institution that operated year-round. The communications revolution brought about by the Industrial Revolution, and particularly the development of printing technology, extended Santa Claus's fame to an intercontinental level. Newspapers, children's books, posters, and advertisements accelerated Santa's emergence into a specific form. From this period on, the image of Santa Claus. Their traditions became much more similar. Local differences across various regions gradually disappeared, and instead, a single, universal Santa Claus image began to emerge. The 19th century also radically altered the understanding of Christmas in Victorian England. Queen Victoria and her husband, Prince Albert, transformed Christmas celebrations into a family-centered tradition. The tradition of decorating Christmas trees became popular during this period, domestic celebrations grew, and the emphasis on family and children became stronger. This cultural transformation contributed to Santa Claus becoming a part of the family structure. Santa Claus was no longer merely a religious figure. He became a character expected to enter homes and represent the warmth of family. The figure of Father Christmas in England merged with that of Santa Claus in America, establishing a common cultural foundation. By the end of the 19th century, both the visual and symbolic identity of Santa Claus had been largely finalized. Figures that had existed under different names in different cultures for centuries had finally coalesced into a single, modern identity, a plump, cheerful, red-suited Santa Claus who lived in the North Pole, rode with his flying reindeer, monitored children's behavior throughout the year, rewarded the good and warned the bad. This modern identity would be further consolidated in the 20th century by the influence of mass communication, cinema, advertising, and globalization, becoming a universal icon recognized in nearly every country in the world. The 20th century marks the most critical turning point in the transformation of the figure of Santa Claus from merely a religious, folkloric, and cultural symbol into a global icon. This century was a period in which industrialization was fully established, mass production gained momentum, advertising became a science, and mass media became an indispensable part of daily life worldwide. Amidst all these changes, the figure of Santa Claus became one of the most recognizable characters in the world. Moreover, this fame was not solely achieved through theology or folklore, but through direct consumer culture, the appeal of capitalism, modern marketing techniques, and cultural diffusion. The image of Santa Claus, a chubby, cheerful Santa Claus in a red and white suit, which began appearing in commercial illustrations and advertisements at the end of the 20th century, was already becoming a modern symbol by the turn of the 20th century. However, it was the mass media industry, and particularly the advertising culture, that transformed him into a global phenomenon in the United States. At the beginning of the 20th century, newspapers, magazines, posters, and postcards began to portray Santa Claus as an increasingly colorful, relatable, more human, and more humorous character. These designs conveyed a warmth consistent with the industrial production mentality of the time. Santa Claus was a figure who warmed people's hearts and represented the joyful face of the consumer era. One of the most powerful steps in the popularization of Santa Claus during this period was the massive advertising campaign launched by Coca-Cola in the 1930s. Although Coca-Cola did not invent Santa Claus, the campaign figure, designed in red and white, radically changed the world's perception of Santa Claus. In his Santa Claus paintings for Coca-Cola, artist Haddon Sundblom transformed the character into a plump grandfather with a warm smile, a round face, and a red and white outfit. This design proved so successful that it soon became accepted worldwide as the real Santa Claus. At the same time, scenes of Santa Claus delivering gifts to children, posing in front of fireplaces, walking in the snow, or talking with his elves in advertising posters transform him into a living character. The power of the advertising industry not only promotes Santa Claus, it also transforms the Christmas season, December, into a truly special shopping season. From the mid-20th century onward, American shopping malls began hosting events featuring Santa Claus in person. Children would take photos with him in malls, make their wishes, and receive gifts. This tradition quickly spread from the United States to Canada, Europe, and then the entire world. Santa Claus was no longer just a character, he was a vibrant part of the shopping experience. The development of television during this period further accelerated the globalization of Santa Claus. From the 1950s onward, Christmas-themed films, cartoons, commercials, and special programs broadcast in the United States made Santa Claus an indispensable part of modern culture. Thanks to productions such as Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Frosty the Snowman, Miracle on 34th Street, and Santa Claus is Coming to Town, especially in 1958, Santa Claus became an international figure appealing not only to children but to entire families. The rise of consumer culture radically transformed Santa Claus's function. Santa Claus went beyond being a helping angel, a saint, or a folklore hero, he became the visible face of a vast, global economy. The size of the gifts, the splendor of the packaging, shopping campaigns, sales periods, commercials, and the marketing strategies of the entire winter season all utilize Santa Claus's imagery. This magnified Santa's economic influence so much that many countries declared December the busiest shopping season of the year. Towards the end of the century, Santa Claus became a symbol not only of Western culture but also, thanks to globalization, a common symbol of the world. From Japan to Brazil, from Russia to South Africa, many countries adapted Santa Claus into their own cultures. In some countries, he is known by local names, in some, he is completely detached from any religious affiliation, in others, he is used merely as a decorative figure. However, the common thread is this: the modern version of Santa Claus has become one of the most recognizable icons of global capitalism, like Coca-Cola's red bottle label, the McDonald's logo, or Disney characters. Today, Santa Claus is not just a character, he is a cultural industry, a seasonal brand, an emotional marketing symbol, and an indispensable part of millions of people's childhood memories. The consumer culture of the 20th century carried him everywhere like wings: television, cinema, advertising, fashion, shopping malls, digital media, and even postal services used Santa Claus as a means of communication. Therefore, the modern Santa Claus, in a rare historical instance, combines a religious-rooted figure with capitalist culture to create a whole. It is one of the most striking examples of how it spread throughout the planet. The figure of Santa Claus is not only a folklore character with historical roots, it is also a symbol carrying multi-layered meanings in terms of psychology, sociology, anthropology, and cultural studies. Therefore, in modern societies, Santa Claus's function extends far beyond the obvious. His duties are not limited to delivering gifts. He reinforces social norms, strengthens family relationships, maintains cultural rituals, contributes to children's cognitive development, and has become a regulatory element of consumer culture. Understanding Santa Claus's psychological and social functions is crucial for understanding how the modern world functions. One of the most fundamental psychological functions of the Santa Claus figure is his nurturing of childhood imagination. Children perceive Santa Claus not as a concrete reality, but as a representative of a magical world of possibilities. According to psychologists, children's ability to maintain flexible boundaries between reality and fantasy at certain ages supports their creative development. Santa Claus provides this flexibility within a safe space. A child's ability to look up at the sky on New Year's Eve and imagine flying reindeer, to imagine a figure passing through a chimney, to recognize a secret gift and interpret it as a magical act plays a significant role in helping children learn symbolic thinking. Therefore, Santa Claus is essentially a socially legitimized tool for imagination education. From a family perspective, Santa Claus serves as a ritual that strengthens intergenerational bonds. In many families, the holiday season is filled with activities such as gatherings, preparing meals, decorating the house, exchanging gifts, and spending time together. Santa's centrality to this process translates into a shared family story. The surprises parents prepare for their children, the gifts, the letters, and the excitement experienced on New Year's morning are all symbolic acts that build feelings of love and commitment within the family. Santa's presence encourages families to actively participate in their children's emotional worlds. This plays a special role in cross-cultural rituals, often referred to as the collective theater of happiness. Socially, Santa Claus also functions as an authority figure, reinforcing norms of behavior. In many cultures, Santa Claus is depicted not only as a gift-bringer but also as a character who monitors children's behavior, rewarding good behavior and punishing bad behavior. The notion of, "you don't get a gift if you're naughty," helps children understand social rules. This is a fairy tale version of the reward-punishment mechanism in modern societies. The association of Santa with goodness facilitates the direct teaching of social norms to children. Psychologically, the figure of Santa Claus serves as a nostalgic solace even for adults. Santa Claus symbolizes a sense of childhood that hasn't been lost. Furthermore, amidst the busyness of the modern world, stressful lifestyles, and fast-paced consumerism, the joy, purity, and goodness that Santa represents provide emotional relief for many adults. Therefore, the figure of Santa Claus is an object of nostalgia that appeals not only to children but also to adults. According to some psychological theories, Santa's influence on adults is that he renews emotional ties people have with the past and strengthens a sense of social solidarity. According to social experts, Santa Claus is also a symbol of collective identity. This is because the Christmas season has evolved from a religious period to a cultural holiday in many parts of the world. Thus, Santa Claus has become a figure that brings together large segments of society. Santa's popularity allows societies to establish a sense of unity through a shared ritual. Christmas-themed decorations used in public spaces, mass celebrations, public events, and city winter decorations transform the figure of Santa into a tool for social bonding. Therefore, Santa Claus has become a functional part of today's collective memory. From an economic perspective, the Santa Claus figure is an important symbol of consumer culture. The Christmas season represents the largest shopping season of the year. During this period, family spending increases, companies organize Santa Claus-themed campaigns, advertisements use the figure as a marketing tool, and brands combine the spirit of Christmas with commercial purposes. However, interpreting this situation solely as commerce's use of Santa Claus would be insufficient. In this case, Santa Claus functions as a seasonal economic regulator. Shopping malls and brands use Santa Claus to increase economic activity at the end of the year. This mobility plays a critical role in the sustainability of economic systems. Thus, Santa Claus has become one of the invisible actors of the modern economy. Another dimension of Santa Claus's psychological and social functions is cultural transmission. Santa Claus stories, songs, films, traditional New Year's events, and family rituals ensure that culture is reproduced in each generation. Children's belief in Santa Claus is, in fact, a way of passing down a cultural tale from generation to generation. This tale expands, shapes, and diversifies over time, taking on different colors in different societies. In this respect, Santa Claus is one of the symbols that ensure cultural continuity. Ultimately, the figure of Santa Claus is a multifunctional symbol in the modern world. It supports children's psychological development, strengthens family ties, reinforces social norms, regulates consumer culture, generates nostalgia, creates collective identity, and enables cross-cultural interaction. What makes him unique is that he fulfills all these functions simultaneously. Therefore, Santa Claus is not just a character, he is the most powerful representation of a shared story that societies choose to tell about themselves. In the social unconscious, Santa Claus is one of the most powerful symbols in the collective imagination of modern people. This figure is not only a tradition that emerges at a certain time of year, it is also a mirror reflecting the shared desires, fears, and longings accumulated over generations in the subconscious of societies. Santa Claus's smiling face, red robe, and sack full of gifts are like the visual representation of a deep psychological need, the desire to be safe, protected, rewarded, and loved. Above all, Santa Claus represents the idea of unconditional love and acceptance. While the idea that children should be mindful of their good or bad behavior is a cultural narrative, Santa Claus actually implies that every child is valuable, that every child deserves a gift. This discourse softens the relationship, particularly with traditional authority figures. The rigidity of the father figure, the rules of social order, and the sanctions of religion, all melt away in Santa's cheerful face. Thus, Santa Claus subconsciously appears as a warmer, more accessible, and more compassionate version of parental authority. Santa Claus also represents compensation for a lack. He appears during the winter season, when poverty, loss, inequality, and loneliness are most acute, and gives people, especially children, the sense that life always holds hope. Therefore, in the social subconscious, Santa Claus symbolizes abundance in the face of want, light in the face of darkness, and healing magic in the face of despair. Another profound dimension is Santa's connection to childhood. The figure of Santa Claus represents the purity, curiosity, and innocence lost during the processes of growing up and becoming an adult. He fulfills the adult's need to connect with the child within. Therefore, Santa's presence is not only for children but also for adults. He whispers that the fairy tale world we thought we had lost as we grew up may still exist. Another important role of Santa Claus in the social subconscious is that he perpetuates the cycle of hope. He appears at the same time each year, ensuring the repetition of the same rituals year after year, thus creating a sense of order, continuity, and stability in the collective memory. This repetition serves as a kind of psychological renewal for the collective consciousness. Just as nature is plunged into darkness each winter and reborn each spring, Santa Claus assumes the role of a winter light in society's emotional cycle. Finally, Santa Claus functions as a bridge between consumerism and sentimentality in the modern age's subconscious. On the one hand, he represents the gift-giving ritual created by capitalism, while on the other, he legitimizes this act with emotional concepts such as love, sharing, and connection. Thus, Santa Claus becomes a cultural mechanism that integrates the material demands of the modern world with emotional needs. Considering all this, Santa Claus is not merely a Christmas figure in the social subconscious, he is a mythological reflection of humanity's deepest emotional needs, hopes, fears, and longings. He has become a unique cultural symbol, embodying both the myths of the ancient world and the desires of the modern world. In medieval societies, there was no direct equivalent to the figure we know today as Santa Claus. However, Saint Nicholas, Sinterklaas, Saint Nicholas Day, gift-bringing spirits, fertility figures, and the protective figures of winter festivals exerted significant influence on economic life. These influences were not limited to religious rituals, they shaped market movements, production cycles, trade routes, and society's spending habits. First and foremost, in regions where the cult of Saint Nicholas was strong, large-scale markets were held during winter festivals. Held between late November and mid-December, these markets were not only a site of religious celebration but also a critical period for the local economy to thrive. At these markets, merchants earned their largest incomes of the year by selling food, fabrics, toys, handicrafts, decorations, and winter beverages. This created an economic cycle that ensured the survival of society in the largely agricultural economy of the Middle Ages, especially during the winter lulls in production. Saint Nicholas's identity as the patron saint of children and the poor established the first forms of a gift-giving economy in society. Aristocratic families, wealthy merchants, and church leaders would distribute food, bread, money, and clothing to the poor during Saint Nicholas's feast day. These donations formed the backbone of the social welfare network of the period, as the state lacked social security mechanisms. Therefore, Santa Claus's historical roots were not only a symbolic figure of abundance, but also a social regulator who temporarily alleviated economic imbalances in medieval society. Another influence of these figures on the medieval economy emerged through the standardization of consumption rituals. Early forms of what we now call modern-day Christmas shopping were already beginning to emerge during this period. Small gifts given to children, candies, fruits, handmade toys, fabrics kept as end-of-year gifts, and kitchen supplies created both a social tradition and an economic stimulus. While consumption rituals varied according to people's income levels, the economic impact of the gift-giving tradition spread across all social classes. Particularly in Northern European societies, the preparation of special meals in homes for the visit of Sinterklaas or similar figures, and the consumption of certain foods only during these periods, increased demand in markets, creating a winter season for all producers, from bakers and butchers to spice sellers and winemakers. This can be considered one of the rare seasonal economic booms seen within the stagnant structure of the medieval economy. The Church's acceptance of these figures within the religious order and the officialization of certain days also created activity on trade routes. Goods such as velvet, candles, horse-drawn carriage decorations, incense, wine, beer, and special celebratory breads were transported between towns and cities. During these periods, trade caravans moved more frequently, increasing taxes levied on city entrances and exits, generating additional income for feudal lords. The economic impact of these figures was not limited to production and trade, they also influenced society's relationship with money. In the Middle Ages, money was generally not used for daily needs but was rather reserved for taxes, large purchases, or intercity trade. However, on special occasions like the Feast of Saint Nicholas, people began to view spending money as a legitimate behavior, thus creating a seasonal circulation of money. This served as a kind of revitalizing factor during the winter months, when the economy stagnated. In short, even if today's Santa Claus figure wasn't directly present in medieval society, the influence of religious and folkloric characters who could be considered his ancestors on the economic order was quite evident. Gift-giving rituals, the revival of the market economy, the commercial opportunities created by winter festivals, social assistance mechanisms, and the periodization of consumption habits all became important elements shaping both the economic and social structures of the Middle Ages. Therefore, the roots of Santa Claus's current capitalist figure of consumption actually extend back to the economic rituals of the Middle Ages. This seasonal consumption culture, which began during those times, developed over centuries and laid the foundations for the Christmas economy, which has transformed into a giant industry in the modern world. The Renaissance was one of the turning points in European civilization. While science, art, thought, and social structure underwent a major transformation, religious traditions gradually began to secularize. This process profoundly impacted not only cultural life but also the perception of figures like Saint Nicholas, important symbols for people. It was during this period that the foundations of the benevolent old man character embodied today by Santa Claus began to take shape. With the Renaissance, urbanization accelerated in Europe, trade networks expanded, and a new social class emerged, the bourgeoisie. This urban, affluent, and commercial segment shaped both cultural and economic life. Festivals, celebrations, and seasonal rituals were reshaped to suit the needs of this class. In this environment, the figure of Saint Nicholas also took on a more secular, social character. He was no longer viewed merely as a saint, but also as a symbol of social solidarity, abundance, and prosperity. This change had significant consequences for economic life. 1. The transformation of consumption rituals in the hands of the bourgeoisie. During the Renaissance, gifts ceased to be small treats given solely to children and began to become status symbols shared by urban families. Fabrics, embroidered clothing, custom-made kitchenware, handmade toys, and books became part of the gift culture of this period. This generated a new economic behavior, gaining social prestige through gift-giving. With the rise of the bourgeoisie, festive periods became cultural scenes where wealthy families showcased themselves. Thus, celebrations like Christmas led to increased consumption, significantly boosting urban economies. 2. The development of handicrafts and craft production. Celebrations around the feast of Saint Nicholas accelerated the production of artisans. Toymakers, tailors, glassworkers, bakers, spice makers, felt makers, and horse-drawn carriage builders were particularly busy during this time of year. Since art and craftsmanship were already highly valued during the Renaissance, combined with the festive economy, demand for artisanal products boomed. This development supported the strengthening of the guild system in European cities. Many guilds viewed year-end festivals as periods of profit and would produce special production lines. Today's Christmas markets are an expansion of this guild tradition. 3. The internationalization of trade and the spread of the cult of Saint Nicholas. Another major impact of the Renaissance was the incredible expansion of maritime trade. Merchants from Italy, the Netherlands, and Germany carried not only goods but also cultural traditions. The cult of Saint Nicholas spread from the Mediterranean to northern Europe and then to the Baltic countries during this period. Thus, the figure expanded geographically and, by incorporating different cultural traits, became a more complex ritual. This spread of culture kept trade routes vibrant and fostered a shared seasonal consumption culture across different cities. Trade strengthened the economic basis for Santa Claus's historical background. 4. Saint Nicholas as a tool of economic control for the Church. Despite the great transformation of the Renaissance, the Church remained one of the most powerful institutions in European society. Figures like Saint Nicholas were important tools used by the Church to strengthen social order. During this period, churches collected donations during feasts, distributing provisions and money to the lower classes. This both maintained social peace and strengthened the Church's economic power. This donation system meant that the economic function of the Saint Nicholas cult was institutionalized by the Church. Each donation period provided small but significant cash flows to local economies, thus offsetting the economic stagnation of the winter months. 5. The theatricalization of rituals and the emergence of the entertainment industry. The Renaissance itself was an age of theatrics. Street performances, puppet shows, masquerade balls, and religious plays rapidly expanded during this period. Saint Nicholas feasts were no longer limited to religious ceremonies, shows, musical entertainment, and street celebrations also became part of this tradition. This was one of the first examples of a proto-entertainment industry and directly strengthened the performance economy in cities. The current overflow of cinemas, concerts, theaters, and performance centers during the Christmas season is actually an extension of this theatricalization tradition from the Renaissance. 6. Santa Claus's approach to the modern perception of gift-giving. During the Renaissance, Saint Nicholas was no longer merely a saint who traveled from house to house. He began to be shaped as the protector of social welfare and the provider of abundance. This laid the foundations for the modern Santa Claus's identity as a benevolent old man who brings gifts to children. The figure now became a more worldly and universal symbol of goodness. This universalization would later merge with the rise of capitalism. For more informative videos like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.